This is a fascinating conversation, ladies and gentlemen, that perhaps will open you to a different perspective. Because largely what's believed is that Vedic society was patriarchal. Vedic society hardly championed women. Vedic society, or in our civilization earlier, women were discriminated. They were largely relegated to chores and confined to their homes, separated from knowledge, separated from the world. But what if I were to tell you that our scriptures, our history, our civilization has scores and scores of women who are strong, who are highly educated, knowledgeable, but more importantly, equals in society. Now, have a look at this book. And the title itself says Aryaa, those who are noble. So we've got the curation, the anthology is of 10 fantastic women, which is Chitrangada, Damayanti, Shakuntala, Subhadra, Madhavi, Satyavati, Ulupi, Gargi, Maitreyi, and Shandilya Duhita. The last name, not too many people know about. With me are two of the authors who've picked up one or two of these characters and written. So, Shivkumar Ji has curated it all, but Bharati Ji and Celia Ji, namaste. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for having us.
I had to set up the context and say why we are having the chat. First, let me ask you, Celia, why did you pick, I think you've written about Gargi.
Gargi, yes.
So, why did you pick Gargi? And what did you realize when you were researching or writing about her?
Yeah, I mean, Gargi, I came to know, I know many people, now I understand that many people have heard about it, at least maybe, people who are familiar with this. But when I started, I mean, I've been in the corporate world, and then I kind of took a break and I immersed myself into yoga studies, and therefore I came across a lot of texts. And that is where I heard about Gargi, about this woman who asks Yajnavalkya about questions, and by her questioning, by her asking the right questions, the entire path of yoga is laid out, and that's one of the text reference I use. So I was just quite fascinated, because I never, as I grew up or something, think about women from our past. I mean, it was always, we always, like I was, discussing with you, we always thought that, we are always progressing. So women were something, we are trying to become more independent, more educated. So there's a, unidirection that is going, and therefore the more you go back, it would have been worse. People, maybe women didn't really have that much of a role in society, maybe in their homes and keeping things together. So then I was quite this thing that she was a scholar who is asking questions of the highest kind. I mean, what is more higher in our culture than to be learning about yourself, about Brahman or whatever. So that's where it started, and therefore when this call for anthology came, I said, okay, this is a strong woman I know of, and something very unlike what I ever thought, would be there. And yes, then I got into a deep research, and I took it as an opportunity for me to get exposed to. So I've used Brihadaranyaka Upanishad as the chief text, which is where the whole debate takes place, and then another text which is Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita. So these two form the two core elements of my story, and then I wove it together. But to me, the story is also, I would say it is an opportunity for people to understand these texts. And story becomes a medium to do that. So I thought of this anthology as, how do I bring that richness of not just what women did? Yes, I mean, she was a strong woman. If you read the kind of questions she asked and how she elevated the debate, but also just that exposure, that understanding of that text, right? If that essence could be brought through the story. So that really was.
But let me push you a little, Bharati, before I come to Subhadra. Vachaknu is Gargi's father. Gargi herself is named after Garga Muni, who's Bharadwaja's son, so somewhere around Krishna's time. But you mentioned that Vachaknu sends his son to Gurukula, but he doesn't send the daughter. So is that not discrimination? So I can ask you that. And you say that as Gargi entered, everybody looked at her. She looked resplendent in white, and she walked into a hall full of, darbar full of men. So again, she was the only woman there. So how is that an equal society?
Yeah, I mean, good. And good you asked me this, because when I looked at the whole thing of whether she went to a Gurukul, that was a big dilemma in my mind. And I think, yes, there can be multiple ways. Today when we talk and we look at data, and we could say, yes, it was there, or we could say that maybe women were educated differently. But I think whatever be the case, it doesn't matter, because in the sense that sometimes, like we say, today we say, what is feminism? If women are strong, they need to be same as men. But maybe there is a context where we need to more accept our difference, and that becomes our strength. And therefore, both need a different approach to life, right? Different approach to education, different approach to multiple things, because and that's what makes it beautiful, right? It is the differential that makes it beautiful, rather than being the same. You know, trying to be the same all the time. I want to do everything that the men do. So perhaps I'm saying, so that's the thinking I had. I did do a little bit of research to kind of really look at, could I find some, how do I place this? That was a dilemma in my mind, and I chose this path. So that was the author's...
yeah, the author's liberty you took, but what also stood out for me is Vachaknu never stopped her from learning.
Exactly.
The father and the mother, the parents never stopped her from, in fact, he said, you will learn more here with me, because I'm going to get more people to sit here and talk about discourses. He himself was a scholar, and he wanted his daughter sitting there listening to all the discourses that they had. Even the conversation you play out with the mother, where the mother says, this is your dharma, this is your nature, to be the progenitor, to carry the lineage forward. So do your dharma, and you know, this is your nature, that's what you're saying. But she turns around and says, perhaps not everybody has to do the same.
Exactly.
But was there opposition to Gargi? Did her parents stop her from following and pursuing her dreams? Or did they say, okay, you want to take flight in a different direction, go ahead and pursue it?
I mean, see, that is left to our imagination. But I would say, how many people would reach that kind of, you know, because we are talking of something really high, right? The place that she reached, and that is covered in the text.
Correct.
Being a Brahmavadini, somebody who really knew the Brahman. I mean, that's not something we can just throw around and say, you know, I know, you know. These are rare people. And she's one of them. That is a fact. Now, we can look back and say, how could that have happened? So, I mean,
couldn't have happened unless there was encouragement, unless there was sharing of knowledge, unless there was exposure.
I mean, how many men, even if we go to that thing, right? How many men would reach there, right? Very few. So, yeah, and then we can book...
Yagnavalkya himself extols the virtues and the abilities of Gargi.
Yes,
and he says, you have extracted knowledge from me which nobody else could have.
Yeah, and even in the second text, he says, I mean, he uses such words for her, right? And then in the final thing, it's about she goes and, you know, the final stage or whatever. But yeah, and even in the debate.
She dissolves into Brahman.
She dissolves into Brahman, yes.
So
and I thought that was the most, you know, beautiful part.
No, and how many people in our scriptures, how many men also have been chronicled to say they dissolved into Brahman?
Exactly.
So that's the strength of Gargi. Amazing read when I was reading that. Now let's come to Subhadra. Mahabharata is an area of very huge interest for me. Purely it started with the Bhagavad Gita, and then it went beyond to try and talk about, was Karna really discriminated, who was Ekalavya, and all these, and then Draupadi, was she vicious, and with her this one, and did she actually mock Duryodhana, and was she such a weak woman that she was forced into wedding 5 men. So all those questions came to mind. But Subhadra never came out, stood out. You bring a very different understanding of Subhadra. Everybody knows her as Krishna's sister, Arjuna's wife, and Abhimanyu's mother, the lady who slept off while Arjuna was instructing her or talking to her about the Chakravyuha. There are so many people who have said, had she remained awake, Abhimanyu may have just found his way out of the Chakravyuha. So, your thoughts, Bharati? Why this aspect of Subhadra?
So, actually, that's a myth.
But yeah. Break it, please break it. Why do you think I said it? So
yeah. So, beginning with why is Subhadra, exactly the reasons that you mentioned. All people know about Subhadra is Arjun's wife, Abhimanyu's mother, Krishna's sister. But the point is the whole of the Mahabharata Yuddha, if you take that as the heart of the epic, happens because there is a need for Dharmarajya to be established. And for Dharmarajya to be established, Nara and Narayana take birth. And when Nara and Narayana take birth, this lady who is closely connected to both, she is Narayana's sister, Nara's beloved wife, how can she not play a part? I mean, her part has to be, it has to be a core part. She has to be integral to the whole scheme. So, Subhadra is the person who actually carries that legacy after it's been created. That's why my story is about Subhadra in the first place, and that's why my story is about Subhadra at that stage of life. I think all of us authors, I speak for all of us when I say that we chose a stage of those ladies' lives where they made a decision or took some action which changed the course of events following that.
Society.
So that's why my story begins.
So Gargi
where
was yoga and the principles of yoga spelt out, and Subhadra was the actual sthapana of Dharmarajya.
she was the one who she did the nirvah of the Dharmarajya, which had taken so much away from the Pandavas. And there was so much that went into establishing the Dharmarajya. Krishna lost everything. Krishna lost himself as well. But you know, the Pandavas lost so much. Everybody paid such a big price to create that legacy. That legacy, the gravity of that legacy could be understood by somebody who had lived through that. Who better than Subhadra? Who's seen what Krishna stood for, who's seen what kind of price Arjuna paid for it to create this legacy. Not only Arjuna, of course, all the Pandavas. So, she understands where they are coming from, what this stands for. Who better than Subhadra to pass on the values, this value systems to the next generation, not only with Parikshit. It's Parikshit at Hastinapur, who's Arjun's grandson. But there's also Vajra, who is a Yadava
Krishna's great-grandson.
Krishna's great grandson. So, she becomes the conduit of knowledge, of value systems, of what they dreamt of. And she has to, you know, kind of interconnect these two pillars of democracy.
You
in a way.
equated her role with Satyavati.
Satyavati, yeah, and Yuyutsu being the Bhishma of that age.
age.
So you get that combination again of Bhishma and Satyavati again, but hopefully with people who have a better awareness of what Dharma is leading them to.
Yeah.
I wouldn't blame Satyavati, but
So
Bhishma
Yuyutsu is
would.
Dhritarashtra's son, last of the sons, no, who was born out of a maid.
He is born of a Vaishya maid,
Vaishya
yeah.
maid.
He's actually
And
not
he's
the
the
last.
one who, and he went against the Kauravas.
Yeah, he was the one who switched sides. He
Switched
was the modern day Vibhishan at that time.
Modern day.
Dwapar Yuga Vibhishan he was. And it was not like he just switched on the day of war because he thought, okay, Krishna is on that side, I'll go over because that side is going to win. It's not like that. Since childhood, from Gurukul days itself, it was Yuyutsu who has been, you know, kind of warning them of the plots against them.
Yeah.
For example, Bhima's poisoning is something that Yuyutsu warns them about. And the Pandavas can attribute a lot of their narrow escapes to Yuyutsu.
To Yuyutsu.
And it's Yuyutsu who actually berates the Kauravas when they're dancing around Abhimanyu. And after having slaughtered him in the way they did.
Yeah.
So it's Yuyutsu, despite knowing that he's a Kaurava and what kind of dicey position he's in.
And he carries that guilt, isn't it? That he couldn't stop.
He couldn't stop it, and you know, his sense of his morals are always on the right place, in the right place. He's not this guy who's like vacillating and deciding, should I be with the Kauravas, should I be with the Pandavas, who looks to be winning. It's not like that. Ever since
It's not
the
opportunism.
childhood, yeah, ever since childhood he's been like, he's got his
Funda
head
clear.
on straight and he knows
If I can say,
what's
so
right,
his fundas
what's
were clear
wrong.
right
Yeah,
from the beginning.
yeah.
But is this all in the scriptures? Because it is never there in Amar Chitrakatha. I have read
Yeah,
Yuyutsu in
yeah.
Amar Chitrakatha,
Yeah.
I have read Parikshit also. But this mention of Subhadra is not there. The fact that Yuyutsu played Bhishma Pitama, not that he aspired to be the king. So all of that is actually part of the scriptures.
No, the exact part in the scripture is that Yuyutsu was the mentor, he was the guardian, and Subhadra was the Rajmata. Yudhishthir, when he leaves, when they leave for the Mahaprasthan, Yudhishthir actually makes a mention to Subhadra, asking her to take care of Parikshit as well as Vajra. But Yuyutsu is the mentor, that is very much from the
So
text.
he's the mentor, but
Yeah.
he never ruled.
No, he never ruled, he never ruled.
He never ruled. So, but he was only the mentor.
He was the mentor, yes.
No. But why is it you feel that Subhadra was not mentioned? If Yudhishthira tells...
She was mentioned.
No, I'm saying in modern day story. I'm not saying this. If Yudhishthira went and said that,
Yeah.
Subhadra, you need to become the Rajmata, you need to take care. That's what you say the story unfolded. Why is it that it's not mentioned in modern day?
The major problem is how the Mahabharata is read. Okay. So what happens generally when you talk about Mahabharata, and my mom used to tell me this, okay. Mahabharata is a story about Yuddha. Don't read it at home. You'll always have conflict at home, which is a huge myth. There is a Falashruti, entire
महाभारत घर में
long.
लगोगे तो महाभारत होगा घर में.
घर पे लड़ते रहोगे तुम लोग, कभी शांति नहीं होगी घर पे. That's rubbish, because there's a huge Falashruti for Mahabharata. I mean, like, go pages long Falashruti for one. We keep the Gita at home. We keep the Sahasranamam at home. Gita happens right in the middle of Kurukshetra.
Yeah,
we keep that at home. We revere it, as we should very much. But we don't do that with the Mahabharata. We try to throw it out. We should not
revere it, we should read it.
We should read it and understand it. Yeah,
read
exactly.
more than revere. Yeah.
True.
Reverence should come after reading it.
Yeah, because you've understood it.
Yeah.
Right, I agree. So the problem is that the Mahabharata, when people talk about it, they have generally not read it, or they have, kind of compressed it into a Yuddha, book about Yuddha. So the events that lead up to the Yuddha, that gets a lot of prominence. The Yuddha gets prominence, the war parvas get a lot of prominence. And after that, once Yudhishthira is king, they say, ho gaya, all happy endings, okay, fine, that's it, let's pack it. And that's all, what's it?
But actually the end is the beginning, no?
Exactly. And Mahabharata is not a Yuddha story. Mahabharata is a story of peace. Because all through life, the Pandavas have tried nothing more than to avert war. So for a lot of people, they don't understand that the war, they were willing to go so far as to accept just five villages.
And Krishna takes that proposal.
Krishna takes that proposal, and they are not even asking for Hastinapur. This is another big problem, that people don't realize, that they are not asking for Hastinapur. They are asking for Indraprastha, which they have created from scratch. They are asking for Indraprastha that was promised to them at the end of 13 years, which they, according to terms and conditions, was supposed to be returned. It wasn't returned to them. They are asking for that which they have created. And if you go to that, actually, Hastinapur, who had a right to it, the Kuru clan does not follow the eldest son rules notion at all. Shantanu was not the eldest son. Yadu was the eldest son. Puru ruled. So many examples like that. And actually, Pandu was the one who expanded that kingdom. He was the one who stabilized the kingdom, which was pretty shaky when he came to rule. And after him, it was Arjuna and Bhima who do that, right after Gurukul, even before the Lakshagraha. So if you talk about who actually did something for the kingdom, it's Pandu and Arjuna and Bhima. So they do have a right.
They do have a right.
Duryodhana doesn't actually. So
I know she's gone deep dive into the Mahabharata. Interesting, I got to know this, that even in Vyasadeva's Mahabharata, Krishna makes an entry around Draupadi Swayamvara.
Yeah.
And it's later that he writes the prequel. Harivamsha, correct?
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I got to know that recently, so I'm asking you. And I heard you mention this somewhere also. So is that true? That Krishna's story is not integral to the Mahabharata, the Kavya itself?
I was talking about that on the Hindu parenting podcast. Yeah. So Krishna makes his first appearance at Draupadi Swayamvar, where he sees the Pandavas and he recognizes them and tells Balram that those are the Pandavas, they are our cousins. In the Bhagavatam, we see that happening slightly before. Krishna does not make an appearance, but he sends Akrura over to Hastinapur, right before Lakshagraha, I should say. Right before he goes to Sandipani Ashram to learn, he sends Akrura over to Hastinapur to ask about, and he's aware of the political misbrewing there. And he asks Akrura to find out what's happening. Is Dhritarashtra treating them well? But in the Mahabharata, Krishna's first appearance happens at Draupadi Swayamvar, and his his childhood leelas are narrated later on by Arjuna at sometimes and by different people, but the story does not have it in narration. So after the Mahabharata was finished, Vyasa was wondering, okay, now what do I do? And somebody told him, okay, wait, hold on. You talked about the Mahabharata, I know about the Pandavas, the Kauravas. What about Krishna? What about his Vamsha? So he starts writing the Hari Vamsha, which talks about the Vamsha of Hari, which is in 3 parts, but it starts much before. It starts from much before the Krishna Avatara, but it goes through that. And we read about Vasudeva's family and all that, which is why for Subhadra, Harivamsha was a source. Because the birth of Subhadra, etc., does not come to you in the Mahabharata, it comes from the Harivamsha.
It comes from the Harivamsha. Yeah. So you get to learn a lot more about the Vamsha of Hari and his kin and the affection that he had for Subhadra. And somewhere you also write it nicely that through the course of her years and the various paths that she had to take, decisions that you. Hari was always there to tell her that you are being groomed for something greater. There is a reason you need to be closer to the kingdom, because somewhere in the future you have to run the kingdom. You train the sons so that they listen and grow under your tutelage. So you mentioned all of that, so it's brilliant. Ladies, I've got to keep this conversation, but we will do this. With you, I have to do a Mahabharata series. That is true. And with you, I have to work, or we'll talk about your next project. But largely, what would you expect the readers to take away from this book? Perhaps a new perspective that there are stronger women in society, in Indian society, than compared to what's being portrayed. Celia?
Yeah, I mean, one is, of course, I think if you read the stories, you will understand that, I think it's a shake-up in a way, because you will sort of start thinking that, okay, we thought somehow subconsciously, maybe not consciously, subconsciously, that yes, women had to have a, a role which is much inferior or whatever in society, and this will throw light, and the kind of characters that are chosen, the 10 authors, and the kind, it spans across different things. So that is one part. Your thing.
The viewers, what you want them to take away, the readers.
Okay, yes, one is that, and second is, I think, as we, all of us keep saying, go back to the text and understand that, and whatever be your motivation, and even among the 10 of us, I think all of us come from a different angle. Like, she's such a great expert on Mahabharata. I'm very interested in these real texts, and how do I use that for myself, because it gives me,
for example, yoga,
like Yoga Sutra, if I say, it's a very 198 lines or something, right? That's all there is there. But it can give me a complete framework to my life. It can show me a path, to the end of, right, what could be my goal? How do I look at myself? How do I lead my life? Everything. How do I understand my mind? I mean, even from a Western perspective, I'm kind of, in that kind of a work. So just to get that perspective of how do you understand yourself as a human, and like, I mean, our thoughts or our scriptures or even our thought leaders have said, right, Ramana Maharshi has said that the biggest service, and we spoke about service, the biggest service you can do to mankind is to work on yourself, because when you do that, and what is the work we have to do? The work we have to do is to remove rather than add, because I think that is what. So therefore, I'm saying, so a text like that is so great. It is the biggest, even in terms of the depths of science that is there in that text. So similarly, I'm saying we have so much, right? So much of assets. So go back to them and, study them, go from there.
Our rishis and munis were actually thinkers and philosophers and researchers. So that's how the terms of rishi and muni actually come to the fore. And this aspect of service is intrinsic to Sanatana Dharma, or what our nature is, and that's what something Ramanujacharya has also said. So you're going to be studying him very, very soon. That's what you told me. On that note, ladies, phenomenal effort.
Thank you.
And I look forward to everybody reading and, of course, building a diverse perspective. And I hope this anthology doesn't stop here. There are more women that you chronicle and write about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for all the encouragement.
So nice being here.
Yes,
thank you.
Absolutely. A pleasure.